so let's talk open mics. Sometime in the last year, probably at the beginning of the year, I was asked by a friend why I never show up to any of the open mics. And I probably have played, maybe I've played two open mics in the last 4 years. I don't know, I can't really recall. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience with open mics, what I think they're for, where they have value, and really why I don't really play them anymore. So my primary reason is that they don't serve a purpose for me at where I am musically and with what I'm trying to do with my music. So that's the first thing. We're going to kind of unravel that a bit more. And then I'm going to give you my take on playing open mics versus self-booking gigs and what you might look for between those two alternatives, right? And then I say this is purely my perspective. There are going to be people who disagree with me. They're, of course, wrong. No. Here's what's important. When it comes to playing your music, you have to do what is right for you or what feels right for you. But you also have to stretch yourself. That's important if you want to do something with your music. You have to think about, what are my goals? What are my objectives? And what am I getting out of X versus Y? Oh, an open mic, performing out, playing for exposure, whatever. We'll talk about all that stuff. So I want to give you my experience with it. So first of all, I feel very extraordinarily fortunate. I started playing music out when I lived in Cave Creek, Arizona. And Cave Creek was a really cool music scene. Still is, I think. It's got some small venues for songwriters play at, and some other venues that bands play at, things like that. And it's kind of I don't know, we'll call it a Western meets hippie vibe. There's kind of a cross section of people in Cave Creek. I used to always say that it's kind of like it abuts up to Scottsdale, Arizona. And I said, it's less snooty than Scottsdale. You still have the wine bars and you can go get a great bottle of wine, but you can also walk across the street to a biker or Western bar and smash that bottle of wine over somebody's head. That was kind of my take on how Cave Creek was. Just really fortunate to have grown up in that music scene. And so when we lived there, I'd written a few songs. Maybe I had 7 or 8 songs that some of those I still play today, that, decent songs. And I'd maybe played out, I'd played a couple talent shows, I'd played some hootenannies over the years, but I really didn't perform out at all, okay? My songs they were good. Structurally and musically, they were good. My guitar playing was adequate. And my vocals and performance and delivery were subpar for sure. So in 2006, my 2 oldest kids bought me my Ibanez. It was an acoustic electric guitar, and one that I've played for many years and will still play, even though I got a new Gibson. But they bought me that, and it really spurred me on to do a couple things. One, to write, and also to say, I want to get out and perform. And so I began looking for open mics. I got the guitar in Father's Day of 2006, and probably 2007 I started looking for open mics. And I found 2 in particular that I really connected with. The first was a place called Inza Coffee, and it was in Scottsdale. It's since closed down. And a guy named Scott ran that. And what was cool about Inza Coffee is Scott ran the open mic, which you could play every week. But he also did an acoustic showcase, maybe once every other month. I can't really remember. But I had a purpose when I went there. My purpose was to get better at performing, to write more music, but also to become a showcase artist, which I did pretty quickly. And what was cool about that is I also met Jim Pipkin there. We played a showcase together. I'd never met him. I'll have links to some of his music. You got to hear Tommyknockers and Fireline. Really amazing. He's an amazing songwriter. And we performed the showcase. I had to follow him. That's the first time I met him, and I was super intimidated. I was like, holy cow, I have to follow this guy. I got on stage and I said, Scott, don't, ever make me follow that guy again. But what was cool is Jim approached me after and really had some nice things to say about my songwriting. So I appreciate that very much. We've stayed in touch over the years. So once again, check out his stuff. Really amazing. And so I played the showcases at Inza Coffee. And so that was a great place to kind of get a start for me. The next place, probably the most instrumental place where I played music and played an open mic, was Cave Creek Coffee Company, or C4. And Cave Creek Coffee Company was like an incubator. There's so much amazing talent there, which really, to be honest, you don't see at a lot of open mics. Amazing performers, guys that toured and would show up and come back there just because the community. And it was run by a guy named Mad Coyote Joe Dagneau. He's a French last name, and he's still a wonderful performer. He's living up in the mountains in Arizona now and performs often, every week, I think. So he ran the open mic, but it also had a guitarist named Mike Assad who made you sound talented. You'd get on stage and you'd go, it's in the key of D, and you'd start playing, and he would just color up your songs wonderfully. And then there was also a guy named Kevin Brennan who would play drums or percussion along with Mike often. And so you really had a band, and it was just an amazing experience. But Cave Creek Coffee Company, or C4, was more than that because, and once again, I can't stress how important it was for my development as a performer, because what they had is, it's single building. They had a wine bar and restaurant. They had the coffee shop, which had a separate room, which was cool because that's where the open mic was, and you weren't competing with the sound of, beans being ground up, or, steaming coffee or blenders or anything. It really was kind of separate. And then, and then outside there was a place called the Camp, which is like a 250 seat little theater where national acts would come through and play. So people like Colin Hay from Men at Work would play there. Sean Mullins, who wrote Lullaby. Once again, I'll have links to both of them. Sean Mullins is one of my favorite songwriters. We saw him just a couple of years ago out here in Los Angeles at McCabe's Guitar Shop. And so this is what worked about C4 and why I call it an incubator. First of all, the open mic was done on, I think it was Friday or Saturday. Either way, it was the day when people were coming to the wine bar. And here's the way it worked. It was a true listening room. So you had a separate room, and people that were going to the wine bar, while they waited for tables, they could sit out in the lobby, or they could come into the open mic room, the separate room. And if you came into that room, the rule was this is about music. If you come in here, you're listening, you're not talking. That's so unique, right? So if you were going to talk, they just ushered you outside and said, oh, wait out here. This is a place for music. And so you had a chance to connect with people. They were really listening to your music. I had people who joined my mailing list from that open mic. In fact, I had an experience once where I moved out of Cave Creek after a flood destroyed our home. There's a whole story there. And I moved out to a town about 20 minutes away called Anthem. And I was at the gym one day, and I was walking, between machines or something. And a couple were walking the other way. And this guy goes, hey, are you the guy that has the Mexico song? And I said, yeah, I have a song called South to Mexico. And he goes, oh yeah, we go to C4 and we've seen you play. That's my wife's favorite song. And I was like, whoa, I was like discovered like a celebrity. It was really, really a cool experience. But either way, that's what was cool about C4. But then the owner of C4 would come in and he'd watch performers. And if he liked what you were doing, he would approach you and say, do you want to play the wine bar? And if you played the wine bar, that was a paid gig. So you got to play for the evening. You could play original music. I'd usually do original music and a few covers. And you got paid like $150 or $175. It's pretty good. And you got a nice meal and a glass of wine. And that was awesome. So I did that a few times. And we could talk about what that's like performing as what we'll call background music. That's always a very interesting experience. But still, it was wonderful. And then if they really liked you, you'd get a chance to open in the Camp, the 250-seat amphitheater or theater, for one of the national acts. And I got to do that a couple times, and it really grew my mailing list. So C4, I've never really come across another open mic that was that built to create performers and prepare them to be on stage. So once again, I'm so grateful for that experience and the talented people that played there that really pushed me to be better. So that was my experience, and it's one of the reasons I just have never found an open mic that has quite that feel to it. But there's other reasons as well. So that was my experience with open mics. Now, what happened right after that is almost immediately, because I'd been hired to play music at the wine bar and then opened for a national act, at that point, I kind of had the confidence to go, wow, I can just go out and book my own gigs. And I'm also going to preface it with this. One of the reasons you want to play an open mic is to get better at performing and your stage presence. That's a huge part of being a performer. I came to my first open mic with some stage experience. I had a book published. Well, first of all, I've always loved the stage. I've done some acting, a little bit of acting, and was very comfortable giving workshops when I worked for Blue Cross. So I was very comfortable being in front of a room of people and carrying the room. Right? It's always been pretty easy for me. So when I had my book published in 2005, my first book, my publisher started flying me out to all these events, and it just became the de facto standard that I could keynote these events. I would speak to 1,000 people, 500 people, whatever. I would be asked to speak at colleges, and I just got very used to being on stage. It was a comfortable place for me. So that translated very nicely to performing, right? So immediately I started to book my own gigs, because when I went to an open mic, here's what I understood. I understood that other songwriters are not fans. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm fans of songwriters and I consider myself a decent songwriter. But the reality is, when people are at an open mic, they're getting ready, maybe they're nervous, they're thinking about their time on stage. Totally appropriate. I don't expect anything different. I wasn't trying to impress other songwriters. I wasn't trying to win them as fans. None of that is what I was doing when I was at an open mic. I was working on my craft. And everyone at an open mic is really just waiting their turn. That's just the reality. So the open mic versus self-book gigs was, I'd kind of done what I needed to there. My goal was new listeners, right? And that may not be your goal initially. I mean, most of us want new listeners for our music, but the reality is you might be going, I need to develop my stage presence. Well, I'm going to give you some advice on what to do at an open mic if you're performing. Do's and don'ts, I guess. But my goal was new listeners. So I was looking for listening rooms and chances to book a 30-minute to 1 hour set of music. I had enough material at that point. As a matter of fact, I think when I started, probably in 2006, maybe I had 7, 8 songs that I liked that I'd written over 20 years. I was writing a song every other year or every 3 years or something. In 2006, 7, 8, 9, I probably wrote 30, 40 songs, maybe more, that I like, that I still play to this day. And so I had plenty of material. I wasn't lacking for material. And so in 2009, I booked my first tour. I've talked about this in other videos. I toured from Arizona into New Mexico, up into Colorado, and I sold merchandise. I sold t-shirts. I played various places that were hugely interesting and entertaining. And that ultimately led to me doing house concerts, which became something that I did a couple times a year. I would tour across country playing house concerts and small venues, but house concerts being the primary focus, right? So that was 2009 when I booked my first tour. And there was really, at that point, the idea of sitting around and waiting for an hour, 2 hours to play 1 or 2 songs just didn't appeal to me anymore. Rather, I would find a good songwriter, or when I had my band was playing out, I'd find another band that I really liked, and I'd go book gigs together and say, let's go play a show, let's create a show. And so that became my focus. So for me, open mics became more an exercise in frustration. As a matter of fact, I think I may have played one in 2019, and I went with Debbie, my girlfriend, and really I just walked away going, I don't ever want to do that again. I have no reason to sit, and I appreciate that people are learning their craft, but I just didn't need to be there. So anyways, if you are playing open mics, if you want to, and you have an objective of getting out and playing music, let me give you a couple pieces of advice that I think are important. The first is videotape every performance. Take your phone, set it up, and videotape it. Not even that you need it for social media, although great, you might want it for social media. But more importantly, you want to assess your stage presence. One thing I realized when I did videotape, and this came up in a few different instances where I kind of assessed how I was on stage. Between songs, I was used to being on stage. I could banter with the audience. I could, enjoy my time and have some back and forth. But when I was playing music, I never smiled. And it's still something I feel like I need to be conscious of. And I want to be aware of that, right? So video your performances so you can assess and improve them, so you can get better. The other is avoid bringing your lyrics or a half-baked song to the stage. There's no reason for that. So either if you're trying to get better at performing, learn a cover and play the cover, or finish your song and memorize the lyrics and deliver that song to the best of your ability. Having lyrics on stage is very distracting and disassociates you from the audience. And why be on stage if you're just going to be staring at lyrics that are sitting on a page? You can memorize them. You just have to go through it enough times. So those are my pieces of advice. That's where I think open mics sit, is to just work on your initial performance, get better at performing, and just develop your stage presence. After that, I highly recommend you reach out to small venues, reach out to places where you can reach new listeners. As a matter of fact, this is the way I view it. I'd rather play a little wine bar on a Tuesday night for no pay, right? There's that whole idea of playing for exposure. For no pay, and have 4 people there, and 2 of them connect with me in some way, shape, or form, right? And understand the type of gigs that you want to play. Gigs have different contextual basis, right? So in Arizona, there's a place called Fiddler's Dream. I don't know if it's still open, but it's a purely acoustic listening room, no amplification, but it's a listening room. You go there to listen to music, and when you play a 30-minute set, and it's for people to listen to your music. When you play, and you get no pay, there's no pay there. But when you play something like the wine bar or the restaurant, I was receiving pay, but your background music. So I used to laugh about how different it was on any time I performed there. One time I might perform there, and out of 30 people in the restaurant, 10 or 12 are like clapping and connecting in some way with your music, and it feels very connected. It's cool. But then I played another time, and it's like nobody was paying attention. And, I walk back to my table, and I'd be like, is the mic even on? Like, what is going on? But then after, people would leave and they go, oh, you sounded great, and they'd leave tips and all that stuff. And so just understand, that was a great place to perform, to get paid, but it wasn't necessarily a great place to connect with people because they're there for another reason. So you just have to understand the contextual basis for any gig. But that's kind of my take on open mics. It's why I don't play them. It's what I think, if you're going to play open mics, what you should try to do, what you're trying to accomplish. I'm interested in your thoughts. Do you play open mics? Do you not? Do you find them valuable? Let me know. Thanks.